Not that the clap, literally, I just watched your video clap skip. Like, I watched your hands go from here to you bringing them down.
That's super effective.
That's what Zoom does constantly. It's just skipping video frames all the time, and then it picks them back up. And so even when I sync the audio up, it's just getting desynced constantly, and I do not know how to fix that. It's driving me up a wall.
Zoom is not audio equipment.
Please, if someone out there has an idea of a better way to record the podcast where the audio actually syncs up with our lips, because this has been a problem for us for the last couple of months. It's the reason we're not putting out more of the videos, to be perfectly honest, right? It's every time I sit down to edit them, I run into this problem of just incredible desync between audio and video. So I don't know how to fix it. Please help.
Yeah. It's a struggle. We are, we keep learning our little wheelhouse, and then we decide to add something new and get stuck back at square one with our technical proficiency all over again. It's a really productive cycle.
This is the Wheel of Time Spoilers podcast.
Chapter 15, Stronger Than Written Law. And our symbol is the bull with the roses around its neck, Gareth Bryn's symbol, the charging bull. In the dim, cold dark of deep night, Egwene woke groggily from restless sleep and troubling dreams, the more troubling because she could not remember them. Her dreams were always open to her, as clear as printed words on a page, yet these had been murky and fearful. She had had too many of those lately. They left her wanting to run, to escape, never able to recall what from, but always queasy and uncertain, even trembling. At least her head was not hurting. At least she could recall the dreams she knew must be significant, though not how to interpret them. Rand, wearing different masks, until suddenly one of those false faces was no longer a mask, but him. Perrin and a tinker, frenziedly hacking their way through brambles with axe and sword, unaware of the cliff that lay just ahead, and the brambles screamed with human voices they did not hear. Mat, weighing 2 Aes Sedai on a huge set of balance scales, and on his decision depended, she could not say what, something vast, the world, perhaps. There had been other dreams, most tinged with suffering. Recently, all of her dreams about Mat were pale and full of pain, like shadows cast by nightmares, almost as though Mat himself were not quite real. That made her afraid for him, left behind in Ebu Dar, and gave her agonies of grief for sending him there, not to mention poor old Tom Marilyn. But the unremembered dreams were worse, she was sure.
So I have to start with the whole thing about Mat, right? Him being almost not quite real. I think that's just Jordan being like, yeah, I didn't include him in this book.
He's like, I know, I did that.
I honestly think, because, like, he's just wounded, right? He's just recovering from being crushed by the wall last time we saw him. Mm-hmm, that's not like, he's not in the world of the Finn. He's not, in a portal world. He's not doing any of the other not quite real things that Mat has done in the past. So I really do think that's just Jordan being like, yeah, he's not quite in this book.
Well, and I always interpreted that as he's healing. It takes him a month to even be able to get out of bed.
Right.
Which is about the length of time that happens in this book, right? It's about a month. So at this point, the attack in Ebu Dar just happened. He's probably like doped out of his mind to keep him from moving because he's just completely broken and needs to be held in traction until his body can heal. So he's not really here because he's just drifting in and out in a haze of pain and healing and hopefully opiates, because I would really hope that Ebu Dar has figured out that poppies are a thing.
Mm-hmm. And I could see like his Taviran nature might not be active because he's basically unconscious. And that's why he's not in the pattern as much. Yeah.
He's not affecting it. He's not doing things. He's not touching people and pulling on threads. He's just got one set of threads that he's pulling steadily, because that's what it takes to recover from having a wall of bricks fall on you. Like, it's one of those things in Portland with like unreinforced masonry and reinforcing it because of the earthquake. It's like Mat had a wall fall on him. This is something that Portland is very, very concerned about, is when walls fall on people, they get smushed. So clearly Mat's luck flexes to keep him alive from having a wall fall on him, but alive does not mean easily healed. And when we see him a month later, he is like got all kinds of stuff wrong with his hip that lasts for books and books. And he like is only recently like out of bed, you know, it's just, he is not present in the pattern as an actor at this point. That's always how I interpreted it. But I like what you're saying too, that there's a little bit of Jordan being like, yeah, he's not here. Don't look for him. He's not real right now.
So, and then just a couple of things, right? She's having nightmares. We see that, and not remembering those nightmares. And those are the Halima-induced Balthamel / Arengar induced dreams that he uses to, I'm not entirely sure. I mean, I think she stops having prophetic dreams, but she's clearly having them here. So I've never really figured out exactly what Halima was trying to do to Egwene. It seems like her goal is to keep the tower apart. I think what she's doing basically is trying to start a war.
I think that Halima is trying to control Egwene, but also completely underestimates Egwene and thinks that simply fucking with her dreams is enough to keep her off balance and to make her likely to make mistakes. And she doesn't actually do a lot of controlling. Halima doesn't do a lot of controlling. It's just messing with Egwene. And sometimes Egwene's strength of will, need to dream, to veer in connection with the boys, like it cuts through all of this just literal signal noise that Halima is introducing into Egwene's dreaming ability. That's how I've always interpreted it, as sort of this lazy fuckery rather than anything intelligent. And sometimes Egwene gets prophetic dreams despite all of that, because she's a very strong receiver of messages like that. Like, I think she's trying to, but I don't even know, does she know, does Halima know that Egwene gets like prophetic dreams?
I think so. Yes. Well, you know, fuck, that's hard to be sure, but
because then it would make more sense to like change Egwene's dreams, right?
I mean, certainly like Shuriam knows that Egwene claims to be a dreamer, so that's information reported to the Dark, right? That's all been reported.
Oh, okay, okay. Like, so then, yeah. Okay, so Halima definitely knows.
And I think there's a point in like chapter 19-ish where Halima admits to giving her the nightmares. I'd like to. I'll have to find that. But there's a point later on where that's where Halima takes credit for I think the nightmares and the headaches.
Yes. Yeah, she says, and there, I believe there's like a thumb, you know, she's under my thumb kind of gesture or phrase. I forget when that conversation happens or who it's with, but yes, she says that or Halima says that at one point, but it seems like Halima's just messing with Egwene and is not putting in specific messages or creating deliberate misinformation.
I mean, I think that's because they're doing what she wants. She wants the White Tower and the rebels to fight. She wants them to build up a big army, recruit a bunch of people, spend forever traveling across the world, disrupt the whole world, let Lord of Chaos rule, and then have the White Tower and the rebels fight. And so she wants the biggest army, you know, the best forces, the most... And Egwene's doing all that. She wants Egwene to get power. Like, that's the funny thing is the Dark spends all this time building Egwene up to have power until they realize she's not controllable. And then they try and take it away from her and try and kill her. But it's too late.
Much too late. Yeah. Yeah. But this is the point where Egwene is completely just besotted with Halima and trusts her with everything and is completely headached out. And she's managing to get these 3 truthful dreams. And that's where we're at in the arc. And a lot of this chapter features what's going on from Egwene's perspective with respect to that relationship. So you want to talk about the dreams?
Yeah. Rand wearing different masks until one of those is no longer a mask but him. I mean, that's Rand becoming Quendiar.
Also, the body swap, maybe a little bit. He literally becomes someone else in the end.
But that's a false mask. I don't think it's a reference to that at all. I think it's absolutely him.
It's the last that could be done and all that.
Yeah, all that kind of stuff. I could be argued out of that if someone had a convincing argument, I think. But in my opinion, that's not. This is definitely him, like, becoming harder and possibly LTT taking over.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It might be more about LTT taking over than anything else.
I think that's really what we have to worry about here is basically LTT, the insane Rand taking over.
Which we've seen for the last 2 chapters. It's really been all in Rand's head, being like, oh boy, this man is insane. So yeah, that would fit well here.
And then Perrin and the Tinker with the axe, hacking their way through brambles towards a cliff. Brambles are people. I mean, Malden killing the White Cloaks, killing the Prophet's people. Like, there's just a lot. Perrin and Aram do a lot of killing together.
So what do you think is the cliff?
Killing the White Cloaks. Going too far, right? Like, continuing to kill people beyond. There's a point where he has to decide to stop killing, unite people, and go to the last battle. And if he killed all his allies instead of bringing them together, he would have been caught in Grendal's trap. So I think possibly Grendal's trap with the White Cloaks and the Trollocs and the fact that he had to like reinforce them. I think all of that is sort of the trap that's being referred to in the cliff there.
Interesting. I always interpreted it as being the fracturing of Aram from an ally into an enemy, because they're hacking their way through the brambles together. Which they've become very much not together by the time that Malden actually happens. I mean, that's the battle when Aram turns on Perrin, and the only reason Perrin survives is because battles are chaotic and he's Ta'veren. That was how I always interpreted it, was like Perrin's inability to lead Aram is going to lead to disaster, and it does. But I really like your interpretation because there's a literal cliff involved in the battle with the White Cloaks and the Dark Friend, right, or the Trollocs. And it's much more meta and important and relevant to, well, his relationship with Aram is really important. But the big battle with getting caught in Grendal's trap is like, but Aram is kind of a trap as well. I don't know how I feel about that. Maybe they can both be true.
What I'd really look at it from a metaphysical standpoint is the cliff is the inability to put down your weapon, right? Perrin and Aram are both on this pathway to being murderous bastards. And the cliff is basically falling in love with your axe, right? That whole, like, if you ever love your axe, throw it away, right? That cliff is deciding to do violence. With Perrin deciding between the hammer and the axe, he decides for the hammer. If he decided for the axe, he would have gone over that cliff, like Aram did.
So that's a third way. I think they all work together. I think they can all be true at the same time. And Matt, weighing 2 Aes Sedai on a huge set of balance scales. And on his decision rests the world, maybe? This is the one that I don't know what's going on here. What is this?
Teslin and Jolene rescuing the sisters from the Shan-Chan, right? Because the Shan-Chan have taken over, they've been captured, and he has to make this decision. Do I go rescue the other Aes Sedai as well? Right, because he's going in for Egwene. Or wait, no, he's going in when he escapes.
He goes in to rescue Teslin. He goes in to get Teslin, and Jolene is out already. Well, Jolene was never in.
But he brings them both out of Abu Dar.
Yes. Because of doing that, because of getting Teslin out, he also frees the Sea Folk, which does end up having a really big impact, even though it's almost entirely off screen and they feel like a Chekhov's gun in terms of plot. They do a lot of things off screen. So that matters a lot.
And also, I feel like Teslin and Jolene also help him. They like Teslin's help makes a big difference just in a bunch of different places. And her, like, basically rebelling against the White Tower without really rebelling, her, like, refusal to... There's just a lot that goes on with her, and she sort of becomes an ally.
Yeah, and she goes back to the tower telling Matt, you have an ally in the tower now, in me. Like, I am permanently Team Matt unless you're doing something completely crack-brained. Like, you will have a friend in the tower as long as I am there, and I'm going back to the tower right now. So that... it has implications for later, right?
And I don't think it's Moraine, like, rescue that whole, like, balance the eye.
Oh, no.
There's nothing with and there's 2 Aes Sedai. Like, what do we have 2 Aes Sedai together? Like, I mean, Egwene and Nynaeve, maybe, but there's no point where he really rescues just 2 Aes Sedai, except for Teslin and Jolene.
Yeah, I agree that pair has to be. I've just always gotten stuck on what rests on that. And I'm with either just the fact that Teslin is so important, like you're saying, or because it triggers him to also release the sea folk just because he can't stand it when he stumbles across sea folk while he's trying to rescue Teslin. Audience, let us know your thoughts on what this dream means, because a lot rests on people doing good in the world when slavery is happening. But, like, is there a plot thing we can tie this to?
I like the sea folk.
I don't know.
I like the sea folk idea that going in there, like, but again, that seems like a side effect. Like, he's rescuing them and happens to free the sea folk.
Yeah. It feels like rescuing the two of them specifically doesn't have a lot to do with that. That's really about trying to rescue Teslin.
Mm-hmm.
Like, Jolene has nothing to do with that. So what does Jolene do for us ever?
Mm-hmm. Teslin and Edicina?
They do take Edicina out with them, don't they? Yeah. Okay, so there is a pair because he rescues those two people. I'm sorry for getting that wrong. I'm going to edit that out. Teslin and Edicina are two Aes Sedai that don't break under the pressure of being turned into Damani before Matt can rescue them. He incidentally rescues the Sea Folk Windfinders in the process of doing that. And Edicina doesn't really do much. But yeah, the fact that Matt chooses to rescue Edicina on top of Teslin precipitates his release of the Sea Folk. Yeah, that's Taviran. That's also just people, though. Like, things like that happened in real life, too. That's the kind of chain of events that it doesn't take Taviran to explain. Yeah, it advances Matt's understanding of Aes Sedai, and that's going to help him with it does help him with dealing with Tuon and negotiating Shan-Chan slavery versus allyship with the Westlands. There's just a lot of general stuff, but yeah, I agree. I think we've beaten this completely to death.
Yeah, I agree.
And we have not... We should move on to page 2 of the chapter.
Okay, so the next we have Suwon basically coming up to the tent, waking her up and saying, I've got news, and Halima trying to stop her. And kind of what follows is a series of things being like, like in the last chapter with Rand, we had, hey, guess what? We've got a Forsaken. Here's all the clues hanging out. And we're doing the same thing here, which is like, hey, here's all the clues that Argar and Osengar are basically hanging out with Rand and Egwene, our head male and head female channelers, to influence them. And here's all the clues that this particular character is a Forsaken. And so the next couple of paragraphs is Halima not freezing in a very thin silk shift because she ignores the cold, just like Aes Sedai. She speaks to sisters like an equal because she has the arrogance of one. She's watching. She has an innocent curiosity about everything because she's a spy. All of these things coming together to tell you that this person is not who she says she is and spying on Egwene.
Absolutely. I never saw the parallels in how it gets set up until now, but you're right. It's written in just the same way. Like, here's a flashing neon sign. It's very aggressively obvious who this person really is.
This book really sets up the dynamic between Rand and Egwene as sort of the yin and yang of the channelers. He's leading the male channelers. She's leading the female channelers. They're both fighting to accomplish things. They both have a Forsaken behind them. They're both, they've both gone through torture. They both have PTSD. There's just this incredible parallel between the two of them that I really like the way it's set up. And I think that is really important for the structure of Wheel of Time to have these two opposing leaders.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. I'm nodding. So Suwon is cranky but urgent because Gareth Brynn said, news, fetch, go. And it's just reminding us that Suwon has a very weird antagonistic relationship with Brynn that Egwene will decide equals love by the end of the chapter.
Well, I mean, she was sleeping. She went over to his tent. He was doing his laundry, and he was like, I have some errands to run. And she's like, well, it's late. And he's like, well, you can sleep here. She didn't have to sleep there. She very easily could have gone back to her tent. She chose to sleep in his tent.
Oh, yeah. I don't understand the relationship, but I do understand the narrative arc that Jordan puts on the page. I just don't understand it as like a human person thing.
Yeah, I think they're two powerful people who don't want to admit they're in love because that makes you vulnerable. Suwon in particular.
Yeah. It's weird that we get most of our insights into that relationship through Egwene's eyes, a character who is very clueless about how relationships work, much less healthy relationships.
And I often think that that's why so many of the relationships in Wheel of Time are interpreted as unhealthy. It's because we always see them from some outside perspective where you go, wait, you two were dating? I didn't realize that. And like, I've had that experience in real life. I've definitely had that experience. I can think of one very particular wedding that I've been invited to where I had that experience, where I knew the two people, didn't know they were into each other, and suddenly, all of a sudden, they had been dating for a while, and I didn't realize that. And to me, it looks incredibly sudden from the outside. But the reality is there's a lot going on that I didn't see. And I think Jordan does a really good job of showing you POV relationships, because relationships are private. So from an unreliable narrator only seeing things from the outside, you don't see the basis of relationships. You don't see the private conversations. You don't see why necessarily two people are in love. And so, yeah, Jordan doesn't show that on screen because he would never show that from your own POV. He would always only show that from somebody else's. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Or am I just excusing bad relationship writing on Jordan's part?
You might be giving him too much credit.
I think of it more as working around his deficiencies. Like, he knows he's not good at writing relationships, so instead of writing them, he's just gives someone from an outside perspective, like, he's like, shows you that person has no idea what's going on.
He always puts you in the head of a teenager, almost always, or a very young adult, in order to think about these things. And it's bad and cringy. And it's like, well, maybe, yeah, he was playing to his weaknesses. Saying, here's some shitty takes. I know I'm bad at this. Let me show you how bad I am at this. I don't know. I don't know. Anyhow, it's just, this is the chapter where Egwene is like, I know what I'm seeing. And it's funny. But anyway, that comes much later in the chapter. I'm getting us so off topic. The next thing I have that is important is Suwon was human enough to harbor sparks of resentment, but so far they had managed to keep secret that her advice was far from grudging. This is a really critical part of understanding Egwene's arc as Amerlin, as well as her relationship with Suwon, is that they have a really, really respectful teacher-mentor relationship going on underneath everything else. There is a really powerful, like, professional mentorship relationship that's happening and that is in its early stages of hitting that plateau that just carries them for books and books and books.
Well, and a key to that, too, is Suwon's changed face. The fact that her face has changed really fucks with people's heads. They cannot picture this innocent-looking young woman as the master manipulator that they've dealt with. And because it breaks their brains a little bit. And so they cannot believe, they believe her is changed by her experiences as much as her face. They think she's totally different. And that's where they're underestimating her.
Which is an incredible underset on their part, but it does speak to how vain and shallow we are. You know, like, as a species, we tend to take advice better from pretty people. You know, it's a dumb, stupid thing and we shouldn't do it, but we are collectively prone towards believing things when they come from the mouths of beautiful people.
Why do you think we're putting our images on YouTube these days? Because, you know. Okay, anyway.
Yeah. But it's a really cool relationship.
It is.
Because it is so much about politics, and there's just the whole arc passes the Bechdel test. Like, the entire concept of Egwene's arc just passes the Bechdel test. Like, the only man that ever gets talked about is Brynn or Rand. And Rand is because he's the dragon. And, like, that's, you know, almost beyond being a man. Like, Brynn's really the only man that ever matters in, like, the whole arc. Everything else is this just levels of machinations, and it's just all women. And it's great.
And they don't do anything to appeal to Brynn, really.
No.
It's like, oh, yeah, by the way, that relationship happened on the side.
Yeah, his trust of Egwene and his faith in her is what matters, because he owns the army.
Yeah, Suwon's not making decisions about what the White Tower should be doing based on her relationship with Brynn. That's, well, I mean, Brynn in some ways is allied himself to the White Tower because of Suwon. So there is that relationship, some of that, but it's Brynn making decisions based on his crush, not the other way around.
Totally, which is fine. Mm-hmm. Like, that's refreshing. It's cool.
Suwon has her mission, and Brynn's willing to, you know, come along for the ride. Mm-hmm. So he's the wife in this the wife in that terrible framework.
Now, reminds me of a relationship of some people I know where she's the front man and he's the backup. Mm-hmm. And that is their dynamic duo. And that is where he wants to be in that relationship. He makes the front person able to do their thing and have the stage and have the gear and have the space and does all the work, but because he wants to sit in the back and provide that backbeat for the front person. Like, some people just want to be there. They don't want to be in front. They want to be facilitating someone else to be in front. And that is their happy spot. Brynn is that person. Brynn is a drummer, is what I'm saying. And he wants to be her warder.
And Suwon's a drum.
No. I was more like Suwon is the guitar player in this dynamic.
Oh, I was going to make a joke about banging that drum.
No.
All right. I know Egwene is still having some trouble with the cold. That's because, I mean, the cold's new to her, right? And she's still a little new with this concentration thing.
Yeah, it's a very new trick. And it's really intense cold. It's not like a mile. It's not, 40 degrees and you have to get out of bed. It's like probably, it's like down in the 20s. And I'm talking in Fahrenheit. I'm talking in freedoms. I'm sorry, using freedom units. Editing Aradia here just to say that 40 Fahrenheit is about 4.4 Celsius. And 20 Fahrenheit is about negative 6.6 Celsius.
As she's walking away, she casts a glance at the small tent shared by her mates, Chesa, Mary, and Salim. We never see two of those alive again.
Nope. This is, I think, their last mention.
In the next chapter, Halima is burying bodies.
The next chapter.
So sometime between now and then, these three are dead. So I don't think they're dead yet because she wouldn't kill them and then bury the bodies later.
Right.
So I think the whole, I think maybe she kills them because she gets left behind and is kind of pissed about it.
I've never understood why they get killed, but some petty emotional outburst checks out.
That, or just the fact that Mary and Salim are spies for Ramonda and Lelaine.
Whereas Chesa is a spy for Shiriam, who's, okay, as far as Halima's concerned.
I don't think she is, though.
Well, she's not, but that's who Halima thinks she is.
Gotcha.
I think
okay,
that's
that makes sense.
Why Chesa gets left alone is because she was installed by a dark friend. So she's cool. It's the two that aren't dark friends who have to have their spies killed.
Gotcha.
But yeah, I agree that it happens not yet. It has not happened yet. They're all still breathing, but that will end shortly, which is very sad. They are absolutely caught in the crossfire without ever knowing what the problem is.
I mean, the only thing that makes me wonder is it says the tent is as still and dark as the others. So wouldn't one of them be up? I guess everybody's just asleep right now. Like, even the maids are asleep.
Yeah, it's just late. Yeah.
I was trying to somehow make that it was still in dark because they've been murdered already, but I know.
Yeah, no, it makes no sense to leave the bodies out. You leave them alive until it's time to bury them. That makes sense. So next, I've got this exchange of apologies that leads to this line. What she meant was that she was trying to force feed Egwene over 20 years' experience as Eyes to Die, more than 10 of that as Amelin, and do it in months. At times, Egwene felt like a goose being fattened for market. Mm-hmm. So that's where we get a lot of info drops in that form.
Kind of feels like grad school, like a professor trying to impart 30 years of experience into a couple of students in 2 years. Yeah, that's sort of what I'm thinking of. It's just imagine being overwhelmed with just new information in classes, just going to school at the same time as working a job. There's just too much information.
No, thank you. Mm-hmm. No, thank you.
And so it's no wonder that Egwene is like, oh, I'm getting headaches. No NBD, right? Clearly, I'm trying to stuff my head with way too much information. I'm not sleeping enough. I'm also the idea that she's getting headaches isn't really revolutionary.
Right. Totally. And I should say that the secret that brings this conversation up is about the kin. That's the plot context thing, is that Egwene found out about the kin because Elaine and Nynaeve accidentally discovered them, not because Swan told her about them. And Swan's like, I'm sorry that I didn't think it was important. And that's where this whole concept comes from, is that there is only so many hours in the day you can physically learn, even if you aren't sleeping, which Egwene clearly isn't. And even if you never eat, which Egwene clearly never does. Of course she expects to have headaches. She's completely abusing herself and using herself up, like so many of the grad students that I went to classes with. And she assumes that will hurt her. And Swan is prioritizing her best, but she also expects Egwene to be miserable and overwrought because of what she's trying to do. Yeah,
it also goes to reinforce how much the Aes Sedai don't think of the kin as significant until Nynaeve and Elaine discover just how big they actually are, right? Suwon's like, I wouldn't even think they'd bother talking to one of them. There aren't that many. She just doesn't think of them as significant,
right.
So that's partially why it wasn't included in her education. Is like, I was like, well, they're in Abu Dar. Don't you think they're going to run into the kin? And it's like, no, there aren't that many. They're not that powerful. There's there's a few of them, and they're, of course they're not going to. Then they have no importance whatsoever. So I can see why Suwon and Aes Sedai prejudice leads to her not conveying that fact.
That's super fair. That makes a lot of sense because Suwon has the same blind spot as every other Aes Sedai as far as the size of the kin.
There's a line here about ignoring the heat. She did not shiver, but refusing to let heat or cold touch you did not make them go away. You could ignore them right up to the moment sunstroke cooked your brain or frostbite rotted your hands and feet. I like that because it sort of shows that, it is just a mental trick. You're not like using the power to keep yourself from experiencing the cold. You are actually getting colder. You are actually getting hotter.
Right.
And in a lot of ways, like, we sweat so that sunstroke doesn't cook our brain. Right. The whole
it's true.
Preventing yourself from sweating so you don't it's one of those things that, like, when you think about it for a second, you're like, wait a minute, this is really detrimental to your health. Like, you need to sweat to cool yourself down.
Same with shivering.
Yeah.
Shivering is to warm yourself up. That's the point. If you don't shiver, you will freeze to death faster.
So that's why I always sort of assumed there was a subtle effect of the power helping them out. But no, I mean, she's saying you'll still cook your brain. Okay.
Yeah. I also want to stop for a moment and be angry about frostbite rotting your hands and feet. It freezes you solid. It's not rot.
Sure, but it kills the flesh, and then when that flesh thaws, dead flesh will rot.
Yes. This is true. This is true. I finished reading Into Thin Air again for the third time a while ago, and yeah, Beck Weathers, frostbite. Had to look up some pictures after we finished that chapter and be like, this is what he looked like upon getting back to the world of photography. It's some exciting stuff. It's a good story. You should go read it.
No, thank you.
But don't Google it until you know what you're going to find. It's a good book. But Beck Weathers, man, superhuman. Should have died like 18 times over. Okay, anyway, tangent.
So we get the explanation about Suwon staying in Gareth Bryn's tent, which it just doesn't. She tramped back to give this news to Egwene. She could have tramped back to stay in her own tent.
No, she didn't tramp back. She got ridden here by Gareth Brynn.
Oh.
Yeah, the man came in dripping snow, scooped me out of my bedding, and barely gave me time to dress before hauling me up behind his saddle.
Gotcha.
So he rides to the edge of camp and then sends her in on foot. So it is a decent distance. It would have been more than she would have just walked in the night.
Gotcha. Okay. That makes sense. I was making it her whole like, oh no, I can't go home. I have to sleep here. Darn. But sort of making up a reason to stay.
Yeah, it's a decent distance because the army camp and the Aes Sedai are quite separate. Even in their month-long stint, right? They have that separation. It's even more accentuated when they're traveling down the road.
Yeah. It just does seem, I mean, it's just one of those things where it's like, how did she put herself in that situation to like be working so late?
Well, I think that she absolutely could come home if she wanted to. She's not putting out the effort that it would take to come home, but it would take more effort than during the day. And that's all the excuse she needs.
Right.
So.
By the time I finished the man's spare boots and second saddle, did she really have to clean his spare boots and his second saddle? Was that really necessary? Or could you have left before that and claimed you needed to get back and you would come back and polish them later? I think you could have. I think you stayed and found more work to stay later. That's what I'm telling. Yeah. That's what I'm saying about Suwon.
I absolutely buy that. Yeah.
The conversation about needing Halima because she's the only thing that helps with the headaches when she's actually causing the headaches.
No, that's so obvious. I do like, though, how to just keep on the Gareth Swan thing, Men are a trial, and that one the worst. Without a pause for breath, she changed the subject. You shouldn't let that Halima sleep in your tent. Like, she is bitching about Gareth so much, and then she turns right around. She's like, "You can," and in this chapter, she says, "You should trust him more." But about this Halima person, like, so there's definitely that what they say and what they advise, right? I mean, she's saying both things, so it's not exactly a what they say versus what they do, but it's what does she say as conversation and what does she advise as strategy? Those are very different things. The person she's bitching about most is probably the person she likes most because she has the highest standards for him, right? Halima, she just doesn't trust at all.
Well, and I think it is weird to have Halima sleeping in Egwene's tent. And I think that everyone thinks it's weird, but Egwene is not seeing it because of the compulsion. That's my guess. That's one of the few things that Halima is actually like compelling her to do. And so here Egwene's like, no, I absolutely need her. I totally do.
And that was something I wanted to ask you about. Is there actual compulsion happening here?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And that's something that's not really that clear because obviously Halima's messing with Egwene's head. No doubt about it. But it's possible that Halima just has, like, she doesn't compel the maids. She kills them instead. Right? If she had any skill with compulsion, you know, he could have just compelled them to forget about it. So I'm wondering if perhaps Bethalmel, who loved to torture people, maybe had no skill with compulsion.
What was Bethalmel's thing?
Sexual deviant. A lot of rape.
That's literally all he did. He just committed assault. He didn't he wasn't like a scientist or an artist or an insurance agent or anything. Because I could definitely see a less glamorous Forsaken being terrible at compulsion and having an absolutely all thumbs touch for something that we are told repeatedly takes a lot of skill. Like, I could completely buy it. I forget what he was known for.
During his time as Chosen, he ran an extensive intelligence network and committed several great atrocities. For example, he raised and organized breeding camps for humans to be fed to Trolloc armies.
So he's a Nazi.
Yeah, that
he's
pretty much
literally
covers it.
A Nazi.
Yeah.
He's a spy with eugenics for meat production. Cool. Whereas
he was a historian, basically.
I was a spy and a historian. So he was an academic, or he was a spy?
He was very strong. He was a strong academic who was fond of women and gambling and had a temper, and so he committed basically a lot of crimes and was going to be bound.
Oh, okay, and then becomes a spy master. Right, of course, because of course everyone has to have two careers, except for Semirok, who just tortured people. But everyone else had two careers. That's true. Okay, so starts out as a historian who was also a bastard, and then became a spy master.
Basically wanted to live forever. He's like the most generic evil. Like, he's just very generic evil.
Evil guy number 12.
Yeah.
Fine.
Likes to do bad things to people. Wanted to live forever, decided to turn to evil to avoid punishment.
According to the wiki, he was a historian during the Age of Legends, specializing in the study of vanished cultures. I do remember that line. I kind of thought it was Deshiva Osengar, who was the historian of vanished cultures.
No, he was the one who was he was a scientist who was doing genetic experiments on the Trollocs.
Jesus, I know that's Agenor. Okay, Agenor is Osengar, is Deshiva. Balthamel is Arengar, is Halima.
Yep.
Okay. Because I know who Agenor is. That part's not hard. Balthamel's a challenge, but Agenor's easy. Yeah, so I could see this being the height of his ability to do compulsion, particularly on someone like Egwene, being like, aha, I have her standing up for me against all logic and good sense and wanting me nearby, and I'm really good at compulsion. Give me my participation trophy. I could see him having that ability. It's surprising he'd be that self-deluded about how successful it is, though. No, I guess he thinks of them as primitives, though. He thinks that repeatedly, that modern people are like absolutely primitive and he knows everything about them. So the hubris actually checks out pretty well.
Interesting fact here. Remember how Anyanya is one of the only two who think that Egwene is a dreamer?
Anaya?
Anaya, yes. She was murdered by Halima.
Yes.
Who knows that Egwene's a dreamer.
Oh, that's why she gets murdered. Oh, I always wondered if Halima knew, but of course she knew. Oh, that's why. That's why. That's fucking why. Ugh. God, Halima's awful. Just, ugh.
I'm 100% convinced that the headaches are there to prevent prophecies and dreaming. That's mostly what she's doing that with. That there's no compulsion, and that other than maybe just like me more, like some really generic, like insinuate myself in compulsion light type stuff. That's the best I can think of, if there's anything.
I feel like there has to be some of that. Or maybe it's just a good knowledge of how people work and the pleasure pain.
That's
like
what I'm
the
thinking.
Cessation of pain thing. And she's just using basic human manipulation to, I mean, that is basically compulsion. If you know which levers to push, it's basically compulsion.
If my presence relieves you of pain, you're going to want to spend a lot of time around me.
I am reminded of the strange case of Hitler's doctor. Strange story. You should look it up sometime. But yeah, no, that's a really good point. Also, Anaya was a friend of Cabriana, who is how the first person that gets killed in order for Halima to have the information necessary for her story to get bought. So there's loops and loops and loops around that. Anaya had two different reasons to potentially be targeted.
So she might be able to finger Halima as not an actual friend.
Right. So it might not have been because of the thing with Egwene and dreaming, because I don't know that relationship, that piece of that relationship ever got mentioned. Anaya and Egwene having that conversation. I don't think that ever came up again in like conversation with anyone. So it probably had more to do with Cabriana. But it does coincidentally take out Egwene's dream, the person she might go to for dream advice, which, given that Halima should know that she's a dreamer, it begs the question. And then we get more of one of Robert Jordan's strange attempts at understanding how it feels to be ogled by men as a woman. The fact that men like looking at a woman doesn't mean she invites it, as you should know well. I've seen more than a few looking at you and grinning. It's just like, Archie, what? That's not a thing that people should say to each other or are likely to say to each other. But you know that you like getting catcalled. What?
Well, I mean, I think it's basically saying don't judge her because she gets catcalled, right?
Well, and that's fair.
Yeah.
It's just a strange, like, I've seen people catcalling you. Like, what a weird argument. I've seen you getting catcalled. You should know that it's
Women
fine.
get catcalled? No, I think it's just saying that it's not Halima's fault, is what she's saying. That men look at women and she's not, basically, even though she's dressing pretty, she's not inviting sexual advances.
Yeah, it's just like, I get the intent. This line's always, the second part of it has always landed weird. It's just like, I don't know. What's more relevant to the plot is taking that tone came easier than it once had. They are well into this relationship. They are not on thin ice at this point. They are well established on very thick lake ice for their relationship. And Egwene is getting comfortable, calling Suwon down, which is a big leap up for her, given where their relationships respectively started.
The next bit I have is talking about the law of unintended consequences.
Stronger than written law.
Yep, which is the title, right? That's your chapter title right there. Mm-hmm. The law of unintended consequences. Whether or not what you do has the effect you want, it will have 3 at least you never expected, and one of those usually unpleasant.
That's just Newtonian in terms of its accuracy.
I feel like that's Jordanian in terms of its writing, right? Like, all the things that Rand does has all these. That's his whole point about Rand and Taviran, right? That you pull the pattern and it has all these far-reaching, far-stretching consequences, way beyond what you could ever predict. At one point he's like, I'm starting wars in lands I've never even heard of, right? Like,
yeah,
that's Egwene. That's the law of unintended consequences right there. And it's perfect for what, it goes along with the rumors and the lack of information and fog of war, right? Like I said, the theme of this book is fog of war. Mm-hmm. And this is very much unintended consequences go right along with that, where the fog of war is the fog of the future, right? You don't know what's going to happen in the future based on your current actions.
And you don't get a choice of not doing anything.
Right.
That is a choice. That is doing something. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, you get to live with that. You don't get to ever have all the information, but like, you do get to live by the axiom that there will be at least 3 unintended side effects, and probably one of them is not going to be pleasant. It's a fascinating and yet very, very true way of looking at things.
And that's, of course, a reference to fixing the weather, right? This whole, like, fixing the weather, everything's going to be fine. No, you're going to be stuck in snow, and your march on Tarvalon has come to a grinding halt, which is not the consequence you thought of fixing the weather. But you're marching in the middle of winter, and normally in the middle of winter, there's 10 feet of snow on the ground.
Yeah. You know, it had to happen, but it's also like maybe you should have thought about at least one of the obvious consequences. Like, this is not a chaos theory based thing. You wanted to bring winter. What happens to armies in winter? What do they do?
Nothing.
Like, think about that, maybe. It's silly, but it's wonderful also because it does prove the point that there are no free lunches. There are no simple fixes. Nothing happens in a vacuum. But they had a party the first day that it rained. Even Aes Sedai had danced. They threw like a whole like bonfires and busting out the kegs and like a whole party for the first rains.
No kidding. I mean, they all know the Dark One has a grip on the land, and the Dark One is the one strangling it with heat. So you have to celebrate the rain as a defeat of the Dark One, even if you don't know why.
And they did know why.
Oh, that's true. They do know why. That's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah, they informed the Hall that the Bowl of the Winds had been found and used. Minimal detail, but everyone knew that the weather should change. So this was a conclusion of an Aes Sedai promise.
Gotcha. Right, because we have instant communication through Teleron Riyadh, which is great.
Yes.
So the next thing, I have a little bit of internal thought, and then Lord Brynn.
All right.
Which is to say, basically, he's on her side, and she doesn't know why.
Right, because she has to put together the swan thing a few pages down.
And so I think a lot of this is her being like, I just don't, like, she's asking questions about why Swan's acting weird and why Bryn's acting weird. Like, I don't know why he's been so loyal. I don't know all this kind of stuff. I can't really trust him. And she doesn't until she puts together that he's in love with Suwon. And then she's like, oh, yeah, I can use that. Now I can trust him.
Yeah, which is very Slytherin of her.
But it's also common sense of like, oh, he loves my ally. Like, he is now that elevates him above an ally into family. Does that make sense? Right.
The loyalty that Swan bears for her, he will also bear for her on Swan's behalf. And it is stronger, in many ways stronger than written law, right? It's an emotional thing. It's not a strategy thing.
Right.
It's not contractual. It's motivational. There's an interesting part in her internal thoughts is that precious few Amerlin seats had managed to move from a place of weakness to a place of strength over the last 3,000 years. And that's one of the things that she does that makes her such an extraordinary Amerlin, aside from being so young and aside from how few months she has to do her thing. She moves from a position of extreme weakness to a position of extreme power. And that is almost unprecedented in 3,000 years of Tower history.
Yeah, I mean, power begets power. And if you don't have it, it's very hard to get it. It's very hard to take it away from people who have it.
Yeah, the slide from power to weakness is fairly easy.
Yes.
It's a very unidirectional sort of change that happens.
It's very chutes and ladders. You got to climb up, but you slide down nice and easy. Or snakes and foxes, whatever you want to call it. Did I bring up the ancient game of UR previously?
You did, yes.
Yeah. The reason I bring it up is because it has a somewhat snakes and foxes aspect to it of rolling dice and then moving pieces, and if they land on your piece, they go back to the beginning. It's just you're playing against someone else rather than against the dice. But the fact that they're both the ancient game of is actually discovered it's based on a game discovered in actual ruins from 4,000 years ago. Right, so it is actually an ancient game that was played, and the rules have been reconstructed and stuff like that. So there's just a relationship to snakes and foxes there in my head. and shoots and ladders, apparently. That's how I got off on this tangent. Okay, anyway, moving on.
Illuminati confirmed.
Confirmed.
Egwene thinks about the rumors of things that could be happening. Before Brynn actually tells her his actual news, but she's thinking about, had Rand decided to add more crowns to that of Ilion? Had Seanchan captured another city? Or the Band of the Red Hand going off on its own? Those are 3 world event strategy things that she's thinking about. Well, the Band of the Red Hand isn't really world events, but for her it is. I don't think that there's really a lot to dig into there, but that's kind of a time sink. That's where we're at on world events. The weather has changed and the Seanchan are advancing, and Rand has only captured Ilion. He's just taken Ilion recently.
But the news is that the Andorians and Mirandians have come down, right? Because they see the army marching, the Aes Sedai army, with Gareth Brynn. And that army is about to cross into Andor. And the Andorans and the Mirandians are coming down being like, we want no part in this. To get to the White Tower, you have to cross our land. And what we see later is basically they say, doing nothing is the same as giving you aid. And we do not want the actual White Tower to be mad at us. Mm-hmm. So we're here to stop you.
Even though you claim to be the actual White Tower, you don't hold the city. It's a sort of awkward. Yeah. And the Mirandians have let the army cross Mirandy so far because they don't have the strength on their own. But now it's going to get into Andor's territory. And Andor is more than happy to let the Mirandians stand at the front lines if there is a confrontation.
Right. Egwene kept her face smooth, suppressing her relief. What she had been hoping for, waiting for, what she had begun to fear might never come. This is the beginning of her plan to set the rebel Aes Sedai at war with Elaida, pause them for a month of rest, and then gateway there and start the siege of Tarvalin. And this is what she needs to start that plan. She needs a reason to stop, and she needs the conversation to happen between her and the Andorans, right? So she goes out to the ice and basically says, hey, let us through. We're going after the White Tower. And the Andorans turn to her and go, no, we don't know that you're doing that. You haven't made any sort of declaration officially. We don't trust you. And she goes back to the hall and says, listen, nobody trusts that we're going after the White Tower. The only way they're going to trust us, and the only way they're going to let us pass, is if we declare war on Elaida. They declare war on Elaida. Egwene says, oh, thank you. Now I have all the power. I own the tower. Bitches. Right? Like, this is exactly what she needs to take power from the hall. And this is the beginning of that plan.
And she declares war on Elaida and then tells them to stop after they get into Andor? Well, or do they actually camp for the month?
They camp here. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I thought. So they're already at the spot that they turn into.
Yeah. She says, let's stop for 2 or 3 days to negotiate. After the negotiations, they declare war. Once they declare war, she says, guess what? We're stopping for a month. Then in a month, we are traveling to Tarvalin and we are taking down Elaida.
Right. And this is what she needed. But she needed just a little bit of resistance to push back at the hall with. She needed the entirety of Andor's leadership to stand up and give her something to work with. Exactly. And it doesn't help that the Mirandians come along for the ride. Right. And so Suwon is in on this because of how she reacts here and how Egwene reacts. Okay, so that explains Suwon gasping and Egwene being like, what's with your eyes to die calm? You're not supposed to react. So this was Suwon's idea.
This is the plan they have come up with. This is all the late night discussions, all of the stuff between Suwon, all the, we don't like each other. She's just giving her advice reluctantly. That is all set up so that they can manipulate the hall into declaring war. And to do that, they need the Andorans to step forward, which is why they're crossing the territory, yada, 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 yada. But that's why she asked Gareth Brynn here, how long do you need to rest, ideally, before you attack and start the siege? And he's like, well, that'll never happen because they'll see us coming a mile away. She already knows that she's going to gateway in. She wants to know how long she has to stop here at this point to give him rest before she gateways in.
Yeah. Yeah, God. This is... So yeah, it's a 3-woman... conspiracy that Brynn elbows his way into with his sheer strategic intelligence. And then they pull two nations, the Rebel Aes Sedai, and ultimately the White Tower Aes Sedai, all into exactly the position they want them so that they can flick that one domino and just see the whole thing come crashing down. God damn. That's incredible.
And so everything from here until the siege, where Egwene is kidnapped, goes according to her plan. Everything from here until her kidnapping is 100% Egwene and Suwon's plan.
Even despite Halima being an issue the entire time, right. Halima is that ineffective as a chaos provocateur.
Or she's doing exactly what she wants to do, which is set up the Rebel Aes Sedai to attack the tower in strength and have them both go down.
Oh, that's a good point. To have them actually whittle away at each other for realsies so that way both sides are diminished is more in line with what the Dark actually wants.
Is it possible that Halima was also influencing them to come up with that plan? Maybe. Was it possible that Halima's just like, yeah, that's a good plan, let's go with it?
Yeah, and I feel like Egwene and Rand both do a lot of good with plans from Forsaken that are meant to trip them up, like Asmodean being a great example of a time that people tried to screw with Rand, and he managed to turn that to his advantage despite all the pitfalls. And with Egwene being, the other side of the equation with him, it would make sense that she would get given good advice for bad reasons and actually manage to turn what should have been a booby-trapped plan into real success. Mm-hmm. That checks out to me.
And I like the way Sanderson writes that, because the whole reason it works is because she gets kidnapped and infiltrates the White Tower from inside and basically brings it down from the inside. and that was not part of Halima's plan.
Right. Halima gets very frustrated with that. She is on team, we have to rescue her no matter what, and pushes Delana to be on that team.
So that I can keep influencing
for
her.
Exactly that reason, yeah. Because, and Egwene mentions at one point that, like, her headaches have gone away and her dreams are good. And so that's at least one benefit of her imprisonment. And that's when the reader is like, oh, shit. But, yeah. And it's hilarious because she gets captured because she's a good person and wants to do the job right. And because Elida is chaos. Elida's just chaos. Because so many Dark Friends are in charge of the tower when Egwene gets taken. Like, the whole thing is just a Dark Friend operation, despite the few non-Dark Friends sort of scattered throughout. Like Elida.
I mean, Elida's under the thumb of Aldebaran.
And the Black Aja Hunters. Yeah, she's as good as Black Aja when it comes to orders. Not by her own volition, but...
And let's be honest, Mesa Ana is a much better Forsaken than Halima ever was. She's been hiding in the White Tower for ages. She's actually, like, really corrupted she broke the White Tower and then corrupted it. She's extremely effective, in my opinion.
And yet, Egwene still manages to best her.
Yeah, but I mean, it's one of those things, like, they just go mind to mind, and one of them's gonna, and you don't go mind to mind with Egwene. Like, she's just the Two Rivers stubbornness plus the Emerald seat. Like, she hit a wall that she didn't realize was there and splattered.
Vaporize. Yep. The Andorrans are led by Pelivar and Arathel, who don't matter yet, but will be some of the most prominent voices in the Andorran chorus when we get to Elaine's succession arc. Some of those are just priming us to have those names stand out when we get to the succession arc. And there's so many names. These ones will pop because they were some of the ones that negotiated with Egwene. So that's the only interesting thing about them. They're fine people. They just, we'll get to them when we get to the succession arc.
They represent Andorran nobles, right? That's sort of like the Andorran nobles, quote unquote, are these two.
And a handful of others that, there's so many that he has to seed them over time.
They talk a little bit about the rumors about Aes Sedai fighting in battle, and Suwon's like, idiots, no Aes Sedai would do that. But that is, I think the Shan-Chan is what they're referring to.
The Shan-Chan invasion.
The power is being used in these battles, and they're getting reports that they're Aes Sedai, in quotes, doing all these, attacking and murdering, but it's actually the fact that that people call any female who can channel an Aes Sedai. And that includes the Shan-Chan Domani.
That's how the people of this continent understand Damane when they don't have the vernacular of Damane. It's Aes Sedai on leashes. Like, that's how they understand to put that into their frame of reference. So obviously Aes Sedai can't be weapons, but like, what else are you going to call them? You know?
Right.
Yeah. But yeah, that mixed up with rumor, it turns into Swan being angry at gossip mongers, which is fair.
Which brings us back to what makes an Aes Sedai, right? The fact that people call any channeler an Aes Sedai, and Suwon saying, no, anyone who can be a channeler is not an Aes Sedai. The difference is the 3 oaths.
Yeah, that discussion also happens in this chapter.
And I feel like that is related to this, you know?
Yeah.
The idea that, like, Aes Sedai are out there using power. She's like, no, that is wrong. It cannot happen. And we know that because of the 3 oaths.
Yeah. On the other hand, Aes Sedai are not nearly as effective in battle as Damane, so you should wish for it to be Aes Sedai that you're fighting, because the Damane are much, much, much worse.
Just be glad they can't link in circles. Oh, yeah. Question. The Adom is an involuntary circle between 2 women. Does the power of the Suldam add to the power of the Damane? Are Damane, in general, slightly more powerful because it's actually a link between 2 women, and the Damane are actually able to pull power through the Suldam?
That is an interesting question. Okay, so the Suldam...
Or vice versa, because in a way, a lot of ways, the Suldam are directing the channeling as well. There's that whole, like, after a while, you gain a feel for it, or you can see the weaves, or all that kind of stuff. So, like, and when Nynaeve is using the power from the collar, right, when she gets Moghedien, she just weaves like it's her fucking power. She doesn't even have to consult Moghedien and make Moghedien do it. She just takes Moghedien's power and weaves it.
Right. But her and Moghedien are very evenly matched in terms of power volume. Like, would someone like Daigyeon be able to access the same volume? In normal circles, you can. In normal circles, the strength adds. But with Suldam, you have that whole thing where they don't really know how to embrace the power properly. They can't really use it on their own. But, that is so interesting. But
we're creating a circle, right? That's what they call the collars, or involuntary circles.
And we know that, I think Elaine thinks that in the Bowl of the Winds scenes that you actually use slightly less power when you're in a circle, because you're going to be held by virtue of the circle below your burnout power level. Like, and that's just a mechanic of circles. And then you add Angreal and you're going above that and blah, blah, blah. That's a whole thing. But maybe this kind of compensates for that. Like, or maybe that doesn't, because I think they say it in Great Hunt that you can't get burned out on an Idom.
No.
So that would imply that you'd have that diminution when you're on the receiving end of an Idom, where you aren't actually at your full strength. But if the Idom allows you to get some strength from the leash holder, that's an awful term, then that would compensate for that and maybe kick it up by 10% rather than diminishing it by 10%. You'd actually get that and then that again, rather not adding their full strength, right? Maybe it just adds a little bit. Oh, I really wish that we got more scenes that would explain that.
Yeah. And we can't necessarily say that all Adoms worked the way Elaine's Adom works, right? She took away the rope between the 2 of them. She understands how they work maybe more so than the Suldam who are duplicating them. So she may have made a few changes. So, that Adom is the one that Nynaeve was using might not necessarily be a typical quote unquote Adom.
Right. And in that vein, you maybe could tweak them to do more of that than they currently do. Like, and yeah, maybe it's like this. I'm imagining it like the Suldam are kind of almost like Angreal, that the like very weak Angreal that the Damane can channel through from. Elaine says that she knows how it works, like down to its like molecular level. So I'm inclined to think that she made a carbon copy, but I don't know, like how close is close. Jordan implies that it goes down to like an atomic scale of perfection, but maybe it doesn't.
And then the question is, are the Suldam even embracing the source? They're people who could channel, but are they? Like they're not described as ever embracing it. And we get a little bit from the Soldam who are freed and convinced that they can embrace the Source. They're in a weird in-between position where they know how to use the power, but refuse to admit they do know how to use the power. And so what they can do versus what they admit to themselves they can do. Right.
Right.
Are they directing the flows, or are they directing the Damani to direct the flows?
And the phrase being complete that they use to describe being with Damani is not exactly the same, like, drug rush that gets described in the POVs of our channelers. It's like a pale shadow of that. So yeah, that might just be an open headcanon one.
Yeah.
But it's soft and blurry, I think, is a good approximation of the truth.
So the next page is a bit of the stuff between Suwon and Brynn that leads Egwene to figure out that they're in love. That sort of back and forth where Suwon goes off on a tangent and she has to put her down by saying, warm tea for us, which is apparently the worst put down in the world in Wheel of Time, right? Like,
yeah,
stop what you're doing
Serving,
and go warm
girls.
tea for us.
Yeah. Being a servant is the worst in Wheel of Time vernacular. But yeah, we've got this fond smile from Brynn and Swan acting out. And then a thought about how she's still reacting to the loss of her first order. Like, she gets weepy sometimes for no reason.
But I don't think this isn't a reaction to the warder. This is a reaction to Gareth Brynn.
Well, Egwene, I think, is conflagrating the two.
Yes.
Swan is still having crying spells, and it probably is because of her warder. But her snappishness around Brynn is not because of her grief around Ulrich, because her relationship with Ulrich wasn't romantic, as far as we know. Mm-hmm. I would expect that her relationship with Ulrich was strictly business.
And that's, I think, why she's also as confused as she is with Gareth Brynn, because, like, right. I don't think Swan's had a lot of relationships.
No, nothing but the seat, right? She has been absolutely married to her job of finding the Dragon Reborn with Moraine's help,
right?
Ever since before they picked up the shawl, right? So I don't think she's ever afforded herself a relationship before. And that's part of what her reluctance with Brynn is, aside from the fact that it's a weirdly written romance. It's never been something she was able to imagine for herself because of the whole seeking out the baby Dragon Reborn mission, like, which I respect.
She says, hey, can you try and keep the news of these people a secret? I think she's trying to do a lot in the next 24 hours. She's spreading a lot of rumors. She's letting people remember that the Red Sisters did the whole thing with Logain. She wants to get her own ducks in a row. So she's saying, can you just make sure to keep this from getting back to the hall for as long as possible? Right,
because every minute counts. Whichever piece of news hits people first is the one they're going to believe. So they could get two pieces of news back to back on each other's heels. The first one's going to sound more true. So Egwene's just like, slow it down. That's all I need. I can make this happen fast, but not instantly.
But what she's trying to do is basically have people be upset at Elida, right? Because she's trying to get that declaration for war. So she's trying to get people in the right head frame to declare war on Elida. So as far as I was able to tell, she sends people out to spread rumors. Those rumors remind people how fucking awful the Red Oddjaw were with Logain.
Right, just to put all those thoughts that have been seeded and watered and tilled for a long time, just to reinvigorate those, just to get them back up onto top of people's radar.
And so he says yes. And as simple as that, the first step down a road that would see her on the Amerlin seat in Tarvalin, or else deliver her firmly into the grasp of the hall, with nothing left to decide except whether it was Ramonda or Lelaine who told her what to do. Somehow, such a pivotal moment should have been accompanied by fanfares of trumpets, or at the least thunder in the sky. It was always that way in stories. Again, this is Robert Jordan with a wink and a nod. I think that this paragraph really made me re-examine this whole chapter and be like, okay, what is Egwene's actual plan? And realize how much of the rest of the book, and really the rest of her plan until she gets kidnapped, starts here and is completely planned out. And everything is essentially a series of pre-planned moves from now until the Siege of Tarvalin.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I think whenever Jordan says it's not that way in the stories, I think he's doing a little wink and a nod to us and being like, this is a big plot point.
Oh,
this is a big plot point.
Yeah, it's very fourth wall breaking for the sake of dramatic irony. And Brynn is also in this place of, like, not only does he want to support Swan and whatever Swan wants, and not only is he beginning to believe Egwene is worth supporting, like, his own position at the head of an army versus getting, imprisoned and beheaded is really contingent on this war going well. Mm-hmm. So he has a lot to lose by not acting decisively to stick with Egwene on this.
The next paragraph is the one about how long do you want to rest? And he says a month, and he's like, but that can't possibly happen. And she's like, no, you're right. That wouldn't possibly happen. Meanwhile, she's planning to do exactly that.
Yeah. And he puts in this line about, Elida's increasing the tower guard. Also to 50,000 men. That's a lot of people for a small island city to guard. The tower guard is a misnomer for the army that represents.
The armies are getting really big in Wheel of Time right now. Like, there's insane numbers of people. After Dumai's Wells, I think everyone goes, oh, we need more soldiers. Like, if we're going to stand a chance in this world against channelers, like, you have the Shan come in, you have everybody start recruiting. Like, it's both, the world is growing its armies, but I think from a storytelling perspective, it's the twisting of everybody needs to be in an army for the last battle. So everybody pick an army and join it, right? Like, and it becomes more explicit when that's the only place to get food.
Right.
But the pattern is literally forcing people into armies and building up armies to get ready for the last battle, in my opinion.
Either to get ready for the last battle or to just fight with each other until there's nobody left alive. Like, either way works, right? Either you're going to all get together and fight for the last battle, or the Dark One will remake the world in his image and you'll all kill each other in endless stupid wars.
And that's why the Forsaken are working to help build up these bigger and bigger armies, because they want these armies to fight each other.
Right,
but
right.
Our good guys, that's Perrin's whole choice. He has to choose the hammer to forge those armies together into a metaforce to take on the Dark One, rather than having them fight against each other and being left with nothing. And Egwene does the same thing when she infiltrates the tower. And Rand does the same thing when he negotiates peace with the Shan. That's why his attack in this book on the Shan is such a devastating blow against the light and such a victory for the dark.
Because it's shattering his coalition that's built on the strength of his ability to do leadership.
And also he's killing allies who are also going to fight in the last battle, right?
Right.
If you think about it, in the last battle is all of Rand's forces plus all the Shan against the Trollocs. Anyone he kills with that lightning in Kalador, he's hurting his side, no matter who he kills.
Yeah, and that's a lot of the argument that Perrin uses to bring the White Cliffs into his army is like, I don't care how much they want to kill me in their dreams, as long as you don't kill their ability to kill Trollocs. Like, that's the enemy. The enemy is Trollocs. And that's how he's able to weld his thing together, is by spelling that out. Because, of course, that's Sanderson, and Sanderson spells things out.
Yes.
Here in Jordanland, he's going to use a book and a half to make that point with each character.
Fog of War bad.
Yes. And I love this. So the question he asks, have you heard about the Tower Guard? This line, that casual question about the Tower Guard hurt. He was aware that the Hall on the Odges told her what they wanted to know and no more. He's astute enough to know these things and enough on her side that he's making sure she gets the information anyway.
Yeah. Now, fortunately, she has Tel'aran Riyadh to spy. She has Suwon's networks from the Blue. She has Leanne's network from inside the tower. So, I guarantee she's got more information about what's going on inside Tarvalin than Gareth Brynn does because of Leanne. Yeah.
Leanne's eyes and ears in the city, not the tower, makes a huge difference for their side. But yeah, Brynn can't know any of that. All he knows is that she's being cut out of the intelligence he's seeing. So he's making sure to cover those bases, which is a huge show of loyalty for him. He could be playing it safe or playing it for a different Eyes to Die, but that is him saying, I'm super here. I'm open. Trust me.
So then he leaves.
Yeah, he reassures her that their emissaries will not be shot as long as there's enough light for them to recognize the white feathers of truce. Just a nice reassurance that Andorrans are noble people. And then he's off. But yeah, now The three oath discussion is what I have highlighted next.
Yeah. And how deep do you want to get into that? Because I feel like we've had this discussion.
How much time do we have?
How much time do we record it for?
Hour and 41 minutes.
I think maybe we want to keep this short.
This is a critical conversation in a very long conversation that Egwene has. This has some of the actual text of the debate that is happening between now and when she regains the tower, basically. She has this discussion with various Aes Sedai.
And it seems to be she's convinced that the oaths are what make the Aes Sedai. But they decide, they figure out, like, it is killing us. And so that combined with the kin, which is also a key point of this chapter, do give them a place to retire to instead of die to.
Right. But we haven't introduced that element yet, right? The age aspect hasn't been put together. At this point, it's a question of what is it to be Aes Sedai? Because Egwene says the oaths are a prison, and Suwon says they are what makes us different from other channelers. And that is a fundamental philosophical, worldview that you have to reconcile. Which one of those are you operating from? Egwene clearly is not pro-imprisonment of any sort. Whereas Suwon is the old guard. She's the traditionalist, and she is echoed by, I think, Ramonda, who storms out of Egwene's tent saying, I took the oaths and I will die as Aes Sedai. Fuck you and fuck this entire plan. There's a really wide range of reactions from Aes Sedai, all of them negative. Egwene's the only one who sees it as a prison. And she says later that she's convinced to take the oaths and that of the value of them, but she really holds down the, why the fuck would we do that? That is exemplified by the kin, the Aiel, the Windfinders, all the people who don't have to take the oaths and get to have full, fulfilling lives, not cloistered and with their lifespans halved.
I would argue that there are restrictions on those channelers. They have a very tight hierarchy in terms of your rank.
That's true.
And that's where their control on the channelers is. Same thing with the wise ones.
Sure. Avienda's inability to choose the spear. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I don't know. It's
But they don't have their lifespans halved.
But they do go through the Terran Grial and go to Ruidian.
Yeah.
Right. So there is sort of a uniting. All I'm saying is these groups of channelers have things that unite them. And the three oaths is what unites the Aes Sedai away from different types of channelers. That is what makes them Aes Sedai.
Right, right.
The inability to lie, the inability to kill you, and
making weapons.
And yeah, the whole making weapons thing, whatever, right? Fine. But you can't go to them for powerful magic weapons to alter your war, right? So they're basically designed to make the Aes Sedai as neutral entities among the various different nations. And that's what gives them power. They position themselves between the nations.
Yeah, for sure. But Egwene doesn't see that angle really yet, and I think she never feels it in her heart. I think she gets it intellectually ultimately, but that is not now. Right now,
Egwene's fighting a war on a very individual basis. She doesn't necessarily see the benefit to the institution of the oaths.
Right. And she's fighting more than just a personal war on behalf of the tower. She's fighting a personal war with herself and her trauma around the Seanchan. There's this line here. It was easier to be angry than afraid. Easy to mask fear in anger. She would never be collared like that again. And she's thinking about the Seanchan, but in the middle of thinking about the oaths. And you made this point to me off recording before, that she sees the oaths like the Seanchan collar. And she doesn't think that. The way that she orders her thoughts, that's not what she's directly comparing it to, but Jordan is writing those strong emotions in the same paragraph. I think her subconscious might be associating them more than I gave it credit for.
And I think that's the real reason why, she questions it, and I think she avoids it. I think there's a period of time when she's in the tower and raised before the last battle when she could have sworn the oaths, and she doesn't.
You sure about that? I could have sworn that she does. I didn't look it up because I'm a hack and a fraud, but I could have sworn that she thinks about how tight the oaths are.
Oh, yeah, she probably swears when rooting out the black Aja. Because everybody swears.
She does. Yep. Yep. And then I think when they regain the tower, she swears the other ones. But yeah, she pulls out the rod and swears the first oath. And that sets off the purge.
That's right. So she has sworn the oaths by the time she dies.
Yeah. But there's this line on the next page. Survival lost some of its attraction when it was if it was survival on a leash. And you will note her lack of surviving through the last battle through deliberate actions that she takes. So maybe she kind of is pulling a Rand as he walks up to everything and is like, I don't have to climb back down the mountain. I just have to climb up. To a certain extent, maybe she's making those compromises around the confinement of the oaths on her life. Yeah.
I mean, that's something that even with the leash on, she said, I can't even take my own life with the leash on. However, with the 3 oaths, that's not a problem.
Mm-hmm. And she even gets through that trauma in the Battle of the White Tower in the dream world because she, overcomes Masana by breaking the collar off. She goes back into that trauma and actually works through it in that space. But, the loss of Gawain on top of everything else just really, it's a lot. She's going through a lot that day. She has a lot of going on that day. But yeah, it's, in the middle of this discussion about the oaths, or near the end of it, Egwene says this lovely line, I would not be surprised if she, Elida, had tried to kidnap him, Rand, by now, except that she's concerned with us. Well, maybe not kidnap, but she'd have done something. It's like,
no, she kidnapped him.
You haven't gotten news of Dumai's Wells yet, have you?
Likely, Aes Sedai would be fighting Ashaman today. Tovann literally just walked into the Black Tower.
Yeah.
They might actually be fighting. They might actually currently being bonded right now, depending on how timing works out.
Yeah. Oh, Egwene, you're giving Elida far too much credit.
Yeah, she's already done most of those things.
Yeah. And then there's the last part of the oath discussion, which is Swan's whole creating oaths for herself thing, right? Mm-hmm. I realized I had to hold on to the oaths of somebody or I'd lose myself completely. So I don't lie to you or to Gareth Brynn, whatever it costs. And that is kind of the final piece of this round of the discussion.
I noticed Leanne was not on that list.
No, she was not. Swan has lied to everybody except the person she's mentoring and the person she's falling in love with. I'm glad that she's able to tell Egwene that, like, you are one of the people who I hold that respect with. That's good for their relationship. It adds to why Egwene trusts her and leans on her so much. But it's interesting. The morality of lying is really what this piece of the conversation comes around to. Is lying ever morally okay? That's what Swan's wrestling with here, because she has to make up the oath for herself. The oath is very literal. It's like computer code. It does what it says it's going to do. But when it's in your own head, you get to decide, and Swan has to decide where her honor lies. And it's very Aiel, honestly.
As long as you're willing to pay for it.
Mm-hmm. And Swan usually is. Not always.
Nah.
I think she wiggles out of a lot of stuff.
I think Suwon avoids a lot of consequences. And I actually do kind of like the fact that she dies in the last battle, because she avoids so many consequences of her actions and wiggles out so many times to actually have everything catch up with her. I don't like the way it catches up with her, the whole like arrogance of like, oh, we don't have to listen to Min's vision. Stupid. But I do like that eventually she just rolls the dice too many times.
Yeah. It seems appropriate to her personality.
Yeah.
That she just can't stop trying to survive one more time. That's so her.
Mm-hmm. Just one more risk every time.
Yeah, but yeah, she is very morally compromised in a lot of ways. She makes a lot of dubious decisions and gets out of consequences almost every time, actually. The ones that we see. Like, yeah, she's a fun character. That's why she's able to give this impassioned speech to Egwene about what it means to be Aes Sedai. And the oaths hold us together, a stated set of beliefs that bind us all, a single thread running through every sister, living or dead, back to the first to lay her hands on the oath rod. That's the core of the ideology, whether or not you agree with it. That is the core of what the thing is. And tradition's cool.
Yeah.
Traditions have their place. They are, the unbroken thread thing is super cool.
As long as you question them every once in a while and ask why you're doing something. And if it's still important. Tradition without reason can be dangerous.
Yeah, because there's the other side, which is peer pressure from dead people.
Jesus.
I got that from the internet. The kids say funny things on the internet.
Most religious war, just peer pressure from dead people.
Oh, seriously. And greed. Then she ends that with, I don't know what to do about the Shan-Chan, but we can find a way to deal with these Shan-Chan without destroying ourselves. She has faith in their institution, even when she can't see the path. And that's an important part of what it means to be the Amerlin and what it means to be the White Tower and to bring them together, you know?
Yeah, but I take the flip side of that, of like, oh, you have this existential crisis you don't know what to deal with, and you're just going to be like, nah, we'll figure that out later. They never figure out a solution for the Shan-Chan, as far as we know.
No, that's the single biggest unresolved issue going into the Fourth Age is the Shan-Chan and the Aes Sedai. It's something that Rand couldn't fix, Matt couldn't fix, War couldn't fix. They're going to have to solve it later. And
I see that as a good analogy for, climate change in our current society. Don't look up, right? Like, oh, don't worry about it. We'll fix it. We'll figure it out later. Don't worry your head about that little asteroid,
Yeah, we've got technology for that, and there's never been such a thing as an unintended consequence.
Right. Never.
So
yeah, that's one of those that frustrates me right there. I do wish Suwon had taken them a little more seriously and been like, yeah, we don't have a plan. We do need to figure something out. We cannot just ignore them. And again, the same mistake Rand is making. He's like, he's got the spear, but he's still just like, oh, I will deal with them later. I don't need a plan for them. I just have to remind myself they're coming back because he's expecting to have years.
There's something to be said for having faith in institutions to the exclusion of good sense. That's what Egwene is learning, is how to have faith in an institution no matter what. Mm-hmm. But institutions fail because they are made of people who are fallible.
Right. An institution is not a person. An institution is made of people. Exactly.
They can't be perfect. They can't be better than the sum of their parts. Like, that's just not a thing. So it's good that Swan is giving Egwene the lessons that she thinks she needs. She's very effective at it. She's very good at making someone who will uphold the institution, but there's sometimes reason for a little anarchy. And Egwene is not learning that. That is not the argument being made here.
And so Suwon changes topics to whatever she's thinking about, which is Gareth Brynn, because she's like, you should trust him. And that clues Egwene in finally that she likes him, and she figures that out and has the line, you can box Lord Bryn's ears or bet him, Suwon, but you will watch yourself with him. You will not let slip things he mustn't know yet. Do you understand me? She realizes that Suwon is trusting him more than their plan calls for.
Right. And Swan is clearly subconsciously already laying out plans to be with him. One of these days, I'll box his ears every morning and twice at evenings on general principle. Like, you're planning to settle down into a nice, cozy domestic abuse situation with this guy. You're making long-term plans to just keep being mean to him. It's like when little kids are like hitting each other and it's like, oh, well, he's doing it because he likes you. Like, right. It's that. But the other way around, and for adults who should know better.
Right. But I think part of Suwon's personality is that she hasn't had a chance to really have a relationship. This is her teenage first love relationship. She went to the White Tower as a very young girl and has not dated anybody. This is literally the first man she's ever been in love with.
Yeah.
And so she's acting like a 13-year-old girl.
I really prefer to headcanon that her and Moiraine were a real thing, and they're just on a 20-year hiatus because of saving the world.
That's why I said this is the first man.
Yeah. So I'd like to think that she's been in love, and she's gone through a relationship once, but doing it with a fellow student versus someone you've just met in the wild is a whole different kettle of fish, so to speak.
College relationships were very different than relationships out in the real world. There's a certain amount of assumption and connectivity that happens when you're both part of the same college. Same thing with friends, right? It's much easier to make friends in college than outside of college. Mm-hmm. It's much easier to get into a relationship in college than outside of college.
Yeah, I can see that. That makes sense.
It's just easier to make connections. You're more open to that sort of thing. Once out of college, people have their own lives. They go off to do their own things.
This is true.
Yeah.
And Egwene makes quite a big deal out of knowing more about men than Swan does. She's like, wow, I'm giving advice to an older woman. I'm self-aware enough to know that's ridiculous, but also not self-aware enough to not do it. And it's funny.
In the land of the blind, the one-eyed woman is queen, right? Or Amylin. Right? Neither one of them has any experience with men, and they're sitting around being like, this is what you should do with men, which is exactly what Perrin and Matt and Rand do with each other. Is like, I don't know anything about women. Let me ask my friend who also doesn't know anything about women.
Yeah. The only difference is they don't say things like, I wish Elaine were here. She can talk to boys.
Right. Well.
Which she can't, but like, that's the only difference, is that they don't have that thought about each other.
Rand keeps saying, I wish Elaine was here. She can rule Andor.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
All right, so Egwene sets things in motion now that she has officially started one ball rolling. She now sends Swan to wake up a bunch of sisters and get them to do things.
These are the sisters who have sworn to her, right? All of her sworn sisters are like on task to start spreading rumors and seed the truth, which is the lie that Suwon tells about Logain and the Red Sisters.
Well, she also sends 3 Aes Sedai north to arrange things with the army. That's why Brynn had to reassure her that a party wouldn't be shot on sight, is because she wants to send Aes Sedai so that way she's sent a message ahead saying, we're coming. She has to do so much before she's able to actually bring them, but she sent the Aes Sedai ahead to say, we're coming, so that way the Andoran nobles will say, okay, cool, we have a day, and Egwene will be there, like, in a few hours.
She's sending 2 messages. She's sending one with Brynn to arrange the meeting, and one with the Aes Sedai to tell them what she's going to say?
I think to prepare them for the fact that Egwene is coming, like, so that way she doesn't show up unannounced. Basically, she's sending announcer people, I think.
But isn't that what Brynn is doing?
Brynn is expecting a written reply and to, like, negotiate things, like, over a few days, I think. I guess I'm not totally sure.
So in chapter 17... basically, Egwene hopes the nobles will not mention Myrell and the others who met with them earlier. So essentially, she sends Myrell to meet with the nobles and arrange the meeting with the nobles is sort of prepped, and she hides the fact that she primed them.
So yeah, basically what you were saying skeptically, she is sending them ahead to tell them what she's going to say. Because this is world leader stuff. So there's the private meeting where you actually get the information. And then there's the public meeting where you let people know that you have received information. And so she sends Bayonin, Anaya, and Myrell to do that. So Anaya's not dead yet. Bayonin is still a spy for Elida. She has yet to leave or to change her heart at all. She's just completely a spy for Elida at this point. She's trying to sow discord, but stay under the radar. Myrell is Myrell. And then she roots out Shiriam, Carlinia, Morvran, and Nisao to do the rumor thing that you were talking about and get everyone talking about certain things over breakfast and all of that.
Oh, and she sends those 3 north because they have a lot of warders, right?
They have 5 between them. That's a lot. that's a goodly armed party.
Myrell has 3, Bane and Anaya have 1 each.
And you've got, I believe that's a gray, a blue, and a green. Bayonin's gray, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, because Bayonin is the ambitious one that's working for Elida, so she's gray.
She's gray, and Anaya is the blue that believes in
obviously
dreaming, and Myrell is green because she's got 3 warders.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then, Shiriam, Carlinia, Morvran, and Nisao is just your basic Dark Friend Alert for Shiriam and Saladar 6 energy, just doing their thing. And then we get an interesting trio of names of Amerlins.
The ancient histories, nothing really important in here other than the sort of the secret histories treaded lightly in certain areas. Yet it was fairly obvious that after the 4th such plot to restore her to the Amerlin seat was uncovered, the sisters guarding Suian had smothered her in her sleep with a pillow. I almost think that's a reference to Napoleon.
Oh, yeah.
Because Napoleon was, like, on the island and lived out his life on an island until he was sent into exile until, like the 3rd or 4th attempt to restore him. And then the rumors was he was killed by, I believe, cyanide poisoning, but I think later they figured out he had, like, a stomach tumor. it wasn't poison. But the idea that he was then killed because he kept trying to be restored to power, that sort of thing, right? Like, that's very Napoleonic, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought it was just an interesting trip. I looked up the names, and there's history for all of them. The stuff that happened, it was within the last 1,000 years is all of these Aes Sedai. So there's Gera Kishar, Sarayla Bagand, and Shine Chunla. So Shine Chunla was a dumbass, right? She gets killed in this Napoleonic way eventually. She's succeeded by Gera, who dies in 638. And then Sarayla is born in 586 and dies in 890. So these Amerlins are all close together in time and within like the last 600 years. So they're all fairly recent and all associated with each other. There's a lot of stuff happening for the tower in the period spanned by those three Amerlins.
I like that we say 600 years is fairly recent when the U.S. isn't even 300 years old.
I'm a geologist talking about Aes Sedai. 600 years is not a long time.
No, I'm just saying, like, this is older than George Washington, right? Like, our founding fathers were older than some of these, and you're like, oh, fairly recent. And I'm like...
it took the Roman Empire 400 years to fall. The U.S. is not 400 years old yet. So, what kind of fall was that?
And it's certainly not going to take 400 years to fall. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just history at
30
history
tops.
At various scales is a fascinating thing. What is recent? Is like, there's a lot of caveats.
And having extended lifespans changes what you might call recent. If you have 200-300 year lifespans as opposed to 80 to 100, it's a big difference.
Yeah. Yeah, if you can live for as long as a turtle or a tree, you're going to have a different percent. Well, it depends on the kind of tree. Some trees tap out at like 80 or 100. I live around a lot of them. But most trees live for a very long time compared to humans. It would be a different perspective entirely. For more of me yelling about that, come over to Broker Spoilers, where we talk about stone eaters.
So Suwon heads back to her tent, and Egwene heads back to her tent as well.
Egwene stood watching her go, a cloak-shrouded figure sometimes skidding on the path and muttering angrily, almost loud enough to make out. Gera and Sarayla were remembered as among the greatest Amerlins. Both had raised the influence and prestige of the White Tower to levels seldom equaled since before Arthur Hawkwing. Both controlled the tower itself, too. Gera by skillfully playing one faction in the hall against another, Sarayla by sheer force of her will. Shine Chunla was another matter, one who had squandered the power of the Amerlin seat, alienating most of the sisters in the tower. The world believed that Shine had died in office, close on 400 years ago, but the deeply hidden truth was that she had been deposed and sent into exile for life. Even the secret histories treaded lightly in certain areas, yet it was fairly obvious that, after the fourth plot to restore her to the Amerlin seat was uncovered, the sisters guarding Shine had smothered her in her sleep with a pillow. Egwene shivered, and told herself it was the cold. Turning, she began making her slow way back to her tent, alone. Sleep well? The fat moon hung low in the sky, and there were hours yet till sunrise. But she was not sure she was going to be able to sleep at all.
She's definitely not going to get any sleep tonight.
No. Halima's annoyed at not being able to keep Egwene under for those hours that she was out having meetings, and she's going to take it out on not letting her sleep, for sure.
And the next chapter opens with her. She convened the council, the hall, before dawn.
Oh, really? Is that how it starts?
Yeah. That's how it starts.
Oh,
her getting up and convening. Yep. Not sleeping. And then
there were hours yet till sunrise, and oh, man. I am so excited that we are getting to this part of Egwene's arc. This is the slowest burn, but the biggest gears get turned. And I've never enjoyed these chapters at all, but we just recorded for 2 hours talking about this one. So clearly there's so much to extract from this morass of stuff in Saladar. Well, Saladar on the Road, traveling Saladar Roadshow.
It's so good. When I had thought to myself that Watt spoilers can really shine on some of the slog stuff, this is what I'm thinking of. Is this like these characters, these subtle, we get to argue about what these little sentences mean because we've read the whole book and we know Halima's a dark friend. We know all the way that this plot is in Egwene's head and how that's going to apply and why the Andorrans are key to it.
Yeah.
Whereas you're reading it for the first time, you're like, who gives a fuck about the Andorrans and the Mirandians? What do they matter? So
it's just Jordan's running his mouth again. Like, oh my God. Yeah. It's just pure slog unless you can remember all the things, which honestly, a lot of this stuff is really hard to read. This has always been sloggy stuff for me. And I've read these books up through the Sanderson books. I've read 12 plus times. Yep. I've got to be 12, 15 times. This has still always been sloggy to me because there's so many layers and you just can't remember them all at once. And that is why this podcast shines. That is why this podcast has the following it does and why it's still going after 4 years is because it takes a fucking village to keep track of all this and hold it all in our collective heads at once.
And I really didn't think that's the value here is this sort of detail and being able to not have to hold it all in our heads all at the same time and having the village come together and create the podcast and get these details that and I'm not going to say that the community hasn't pulled a lot of these details. A lot of these details are on the wiki or on, Watt Encyclopedia or on, theory pages or on. The problem is they're not necessarily all in one place.
Yeah, there's a lot out there. There's a lot out there. We are definitely benefited hugely by the people who have curated all these resources. So that way it is easy to find this stuff. And there are citations and there are hyperlinks. And it is easy to use the power of the hive mind to get what you need. But it is still a village effort to do this. So we thank you, people, for listening to us having a good time doing all of that in public.
And I'm just amazed Jordan kept it all in his head. That's what really amazes me more and more so is just, Jordan has become more impressive the more I dig into his writing.
Yeah, right. We probably give him too much credit sometimes because it works. But yeah, dude was amazing.
But I think a lot of his credit is setting up a framework where those things can work organically. Right.
And that is something that you very rarely find. At least I have very rarely found worlds that complete. I mean, certainly I don't know if I would ever invest in another world this much. I don't know if I have that in me. I can binge a world and enjoy it, but I don't think I could get into another one as much as I've invested my energy into Wheel of Time.
And so many other stories and worlds and things, you start poking at the edges of what's been written and you find flaws or contradictions. And there's so few of those in the Wheel of Time.
Yeah.
Other than creating a gateway and bailifying yourself from behind. We'll just ignore that. We'll go to the quote from Robert Jordan on that one. Google it if you have any questions.
Indeed.
How you been this last week? Anything interesting going on?
A whole lot of winter gardening chores. We did a bunch of pruning of branches, trees that it kind of droops down farther into the driveway. And just, it's that time of year. I got this notice from the OSU Extension Service, who is super awesome about botanical information. They were like, here's your, February checklist. Here's the stuff you got to do. You got to trim up your trees. You got to clear out your gardens. So that's kind of what we did. Did a bunch of gardening stuff. I pruned my blueberries today and it's unseasonably sunny. So it's really nice.
It is really nice
to do all this stuff. I'm hating how sunny it is because it is supposed to be stormy and raining. It is not supposed to be sunny.
Yep.
This is bullshit. This is not winter.
This is the 10-year drought we're in. I mean, sorry, the first 10 years of the drought we're in.
Yeah. It's very frustrating. We had a really good, strong start to the winter, and then January just went sunny. There's supposed to be a week of cold, sunny weather at the end of January. That is normal. It is not supposed to be 2 goddamn months what we had last year. I remember because I am now here for this is my second winter in this spot. So I'm getting to actually see stuff come around, which is really fun, but it's frustrating that it is drought weather.
Well, however, that weather is getting a lot of people to come out to the restaurant. So picking back up and work is busy again. So that's yay.
Yeah, stimulate that economy.
Yeah.
It's fine. That's all we need. But it is really nice for going out and listening to podcasts and working on my blueberries. Or, I managed to get my back sore from tilling up the garden, one of our little gardens. It's that time, they're daffodils. I have a daffodil that's already starting to form its first bud.
Nice.
The rhododendron obviously already has buds on it. The blueberries are already starting to bud. There's so much life just beginning to start. So it's now's the time to go in and cut a bunch of stuff. So that's pleasant. How are you?
Yeah, good, I guess. I'm trying to think if this week it was anything different than just absolute 100% normal. A couple of date nights. Those were fun. This was a laundry and chores weekend for me, is really what it boils down to. Actually got some editing done, working on Broken Earth and some podcasting and stuff like that. So, and got some tech sorted out and did a few other little things. So it's been nice to get sort of accomplished stuff. I feel like I've been spinning my wheels a little bit on some of that stuff. So it's nice to actually make a few forward progress steps. January was a tough month, man. I tell you what, I'm glad to get past that. I feel like January was everybody around me was almost felt depressed, I feel like there was some post-show hangover going on, so a lot of the content creators stopped doing their stuff, and there's a couple other things that I watched that everybody took January off, so a lot of my normal content creators weren't putting out stuff. That sort of, it was just this weird void in January where I felt like everybody was just out of it, and I myself was also pretty funky. So I think that has a lot to do with the light. That's my opinion.
Yeah, by the end of January, it's getting better. Right, because it's roughly 4 minutes a day, and we turned around at solstice, which was December 21st. So by the time you get to the end of January, that's 5-6 weeks. So that's a lot of minutes of light at that point. At that point, we're getting to an hour and a half more light. And it makes a big difference. Makes a really big difference when it can be 5 p.m. and only twilight. That makes such a huge difference on the mental health.
Absolutely. But up to that point, we have spent basically 3 months in darkness.
Yep, we are pretty far north.
So it's
for
very hard. I feel like my mental health during January is always at its worst. And it's post holidays, so I'm always broke. I tend to get fired in December, so it's just bad memories there. Yeah. So January's tough. I'm glad to be in February. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah. So what I'm getting from this is that we are both definitely responding to the axial tilt of the planet.
Yes.
We're both turning a corner. Getting shit done energy is finally kicking in for the year. So that's nice. I'm happy for us that that's happening. That's good.
Let's not underestimate the Omicron surge that was coming through this city and country in January that added to some of that, I can't go anywhere. The momentum of life got crushed by the virus, and that was a little depressing. Yeah,
that definitely was a tough one to ride out on top of everything else. It's and another wave. This is the variant induced wave. This is great. This is wonderful. That was sucky.
But I will say the bright spot in this month has been us getting back to talking about the books, and how much I love going back and talking about book 8 instead of going back and talking about book 1, maybe 2 or 3. We are so far beyond the first 3 books in the podcast that we don't have to worry about what the show is doing,
It's really pleasurable.
Really pleasurable.
Way ahead. To
be able to talk about Wheel of Time and not talk about anything show related.
Yeah, though I gotta say, it is impossible not to imagine how amazing the actors are in these scenes. Reading them, I'm seeing them now. I'm seeing Maddie and Sophie, and it's just I love this so much. But that's just a in my head texture thing. It's not changing my view of the story. It's just adding so much texture where there hasn't been before.
Can I admit, one of my issues with Suwon Sanche and Sophie is the fact that she's constantly referred to as looking like a very young girl. And Sophie does not look young. And so I'm just curious how, that's one of those things where like I do have a little trouble picturing that because of all the way they describe Suwon as this very young looking person, but like her face changed significantly in the stilling.
Well, the fact that they've done away with ageless faces in the show sort of precludes the entire thing.
Yeah, so it's just going to be Suwon as her. So I'm excited to see the actors, but that throws me off every once in a while, where it's just like young, and I see Sophie, and then I see that like young, youthful face with blue eyes. I'm like, oh, I just have that moment of disconnect because that description definitely doesn't describe the way she looks. Not that I'm not excited to see her in that scene.
Sure.
And I think, wonderful actress and stuff like that. But I guess, okay, last thing I'm going to say about the show, it's so far off of what the books are. Like by the time they get here, I have no idea what these interactions are going to look like, who these characters are going to be, if they're even going to be these same actors or characters in these scenes. I'm done. I'm out of the prediction business when it comes to where the show is going and how it's going to look. But I get your point that you can picture the actors in these scenes, and that is fun.
Yeah. It makes some of the dynamics weird with where Egwene is like schooling Swan on how relationships work because of what you're saying.
Yeah.
That like, I know that in the show, they're not going to like de-age her because she gets stilled. Like we know that is not a thing because they've just completely excised it as a mechanic. So it's like, that's going to be a real interesting scene, but I can see Maddie pulling it off.
Sure.
Like I can absolutely picture them doing it. And I'm bad at imagining faces. So to have these distinct faces that absolutely seamlessly blend with the characters as I know them, all the actors have done such a good job of capturing those characters that it's like, oh yeah, I can see that. They just populate it. And where I used to have these blurry geometric shapes for people, I now have very well realized movie characters. That's super cool.
It's funny because I still have the blurry geometric shapes, mostly. I guess I can picture them, but that's one of the things that when I came back to these books, I actually excised the characters. I went back to the characters in my head, which are still those sort of blurby, basically colored shapes, and went away from the actors.
Yeah, it didn't happen for me with the Rand chapters really at all. I kept being like, oh, right, there's an actor I could think about. Whereas with this chapter, with Egwene and Swan, it feels so natural to see those characters in my head. Did not happen with Yosha and Rand yet as much for whatever reason. Yeah, it's a fascinating process, even though we are in book 8 and we are so far out of the show space and it's easy to not speculate. It's also like this world has a whole new layer attached to it now because of the show. And I'm not mad about it, but it is a different reread experience now. That's all I have to say about the show because that's really it. Yeah. But it is a fascinating experience to be having, even though, yeah, like I agree. It's really nice to be just in the slog, in the beautiful, slow, grimy grittiness that is the slog, which you were having very cool thoughts about the slog before we turned on recording. You were saying like all of the content is nondescript. So on a first read, it's just boring. You just don't care about any of it. It makes the first read of the slug like, what the fuck because they're all being spies. They're all being subtle sisters. They're all doing the Aes Sedai thing to each other. So there's nothing interesting to see by design.
It's a lot of subtle secrets that are just like woven through the chapter that like, again, if you get the reference to the third chapter that's going to happen in the future, then yeah, it's really cool. But on a first read through, it's like, oh, what?
Are we ready to get into this chapter?
I just want to bring up, Lilogen brought up the word aphantasia as seeing blurry shapes and colors for people instead of faces.
Yeah.
Apparently that has a word for it. That is a thing that some people have versus other people.
Yeah, faces are a particular part of the human brain. Recognizing people's faces and identifying with people, like that is only some animals can do the mirror thing, like faces are a very specific part of the brain. And there are lots of weird brain disorders that focus around facial recognition. Many, many shades of that exist. It's fascinating. And yeah, I mean, imagination comes in a lot of textures. Minds are just really, really trippy.
Thank you for listening to the Wheel of Time Spoilers podcast. Rate us in the Apple Podcast app or support us on Patreon. Is that good enough?